Just stand to the side. Adam's a CSE rep, a STU rep, Morsley. Off to the side, and you speak to them, and I will be silent.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Hi everyone, my name is Adam Bremo. I'm the third year student representative actually, but I'm also here for you. So if you have any issues with any courses, mainly this one, although no offense, Richard. But if you have any questions or anything, please contact me. I'll help you with anything or direct to the right people. We also have a first year rep named Jeremy, who's probably around here somewhere.
Is Jeremy here? Oh, showing Jeremy.
Excellent example. He's great. But yeah, if you have any questions about anything, please come see me or any of the other STU reps. You can just email us at stureps@CSE. And I'm actually having a barbecue today as well at 1 o'clock, so you're all welcome to come. And it's actually for our newsletter, which is Be There. So it's a weekly newsletter we also put out. So if you want to come and pick up a copy of that and have a sausage for free, feel free to come along. Thanks, guys. It's the K17 lawn. Done line. At 1 o'clock.
After this lecture?
After this lecture.
All right. Thanks,
guys.
Thanks, Adam. See you, Adam. Everyone, hand for Adam. Okay. Get rid of that microphone. Look, I'm wearing a jacket today and long pants. I could be cold. I'm trying to set new standards because I notice you guys are looking a bit scrappy. So from now on, expect a coat and tie in the lecture. Oh, hello. Very good, thank you. I like your wraparound tie. It's very good, Stevie. Okay. Shh. Now today I'm going to talk about something very important. It's probably, the idea we're going to talk about today is probably the main idea in the course. It's probably the biggest idea in the course, that is. Let me drag this off to the side. It's not an idea that's got anything to do with C syntax, though we will implement this idea in C. This idea sort of is, cuts across all programming languages. It's just an idea about how to program. And it is the difference between writing a program that's what we call a program in the small, a small scale program. Like the programs you've been writing so far are what we'd call small scale programs because they can be written by one person in a reasonable period of time and achieve some small, well-defined goal. I reckon if you were to do task 1 again, most of you could knock it over quite quickly now, certainly in a couple of days, once you've worked out how it works. That's what we call a small task. Whereas if I was to ask you to write a program what's a really awesome program that people like using? Microsoft Office. What's that? A game? Maple. Okay, Maple. Have you guys used Maple? Shh. If I was to say to you that if I was to say to you that the major project in this course was to write Maple, you would take a step back because hopefully it's fairly clear to you that really one person couldn't write Maple. It's too big. Or if one person did, it would take them like a year or something. Or no, did you think one person could do it? Last time I looked at it, maybe one person could, but it probably has got bigger since then. How big is it? It's this big. Couldn't do it anymore. Oh, some sort of awesome game. I was thinking my brother, for example, likes playing computer games. And sometimes I look at them and I'm just amazed at what they do, their animation and the detail and the physics they model inside them and all this stuff. It's way too complex for any one person to do. And it gives rise to a really satisfying program, but it's just too much work for one person to do. Or the operating system, Windows or Linux, one person couldn't write that. It's too big. One person couldn't write Microsoft Word. It's too big. One person couldn't probably write Excel, the spreadsheet now. It is too big. In the old days, maybe one person could have. These programs are what we call large-scale programs, and they're the interesting and good programs we use, like Internet Explorer, or no, like Firefox or something like that. It's a program we use a lot. It's got lots of power. You probably only use a fraction of the power it's got. It's fairly seamlessly made, so you don't notice. I mean, it's well designed, so you don't notice a lot of the neat things it does because it just happens under the hood. But it's a very clever and well-written program. The good programs are like that. The programs we'd like to write are like that. The things we'd like to do as computer programmers, presumably, you're in this because you want to construct things and improve the world and do stuff with programs. The things that we'd like to do are too large for one person to do. So if you're really interested in programming a robot to rescue people from a maze, or teaching a computer to teach speech to the deaf, or writing a program to track down and gene sequence things and find a cure for cancer, or any of the sort of really big interesting problems, you're going to have to, you will quickly realise, or you want to write a really elaborate game, you'll quickly realise that, oh, hang on, I can't do this by myself. This is the difference between programming in the large and programming in the small. Programming in the small you can do yourself, but it's not very interesting. Programming in the large is very interesting, but you can't do it by yourself. Now this can be a bit annoying, especially when you're a starting off programmer, because you like doing things by yourself. It's really challenging to do things by yourself. You get a lot of a buzz out of it. It's entirely your own creation. And also when you work with other people, they always let you down and they're idiots and they don't understand your ideas and it's very frustrating, and who wants to work with other people? Okay, so this is our starting point when we write programs. And especially if you're a self-taught programmer, you're probably not really good at working with other people, because you've got your own idiosyncrasies and your own ways of doing things, and you've probably grown up in an environment where maybe there aren't other self-taught programmers around, so you've had to do everything solo, and you've done everything the hard way, and you're really proud of that. And you think you're pretty good, and you wouldn't want to work with someone who wasn't as good as you were. And the annoying thing is you probably only want to work with someone as good as you or better, and people that are better probably feel the same way. So unless you get an exact match, you're in trouble. And if it's a big program and it needs 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 people doing it, you know, you're not going to be able to pull that off. You've got to be able to find a way of working together, but it's got to be fulfilling and rewarding, because you don't want to be a programmer doing boring stuff. You don't want to have the rest of your life in a career doing unsatisfying work. You want to get the pleasure that you currently get out of programming solo, but you want to get the power of working in a team. So how do we do this? Well, this is, I would say, the turning point in the course now. Everything we've done up until now is programming in the small. Yeah. From week 0 to week 12, and we're about halfway through the course. I didn't balance that very well, but the last half of the course is much fatter. The first half we've just been sort of doing programming in the small. And now, after today, we're going to be doing programming in the large. And you're going to find, to your pleasure and surprise, if you're a self-taught programmer, it's going to be just as, if not more fun than programming by yourself, if we manage to do it right. And it's certainly very rewarding and fulfilling in terms of the interestingness of what you can produce. So, today's lecture is just going to be about an idea. And the idea is how this idea of programming in the large was first introduced to me years and years ago. And it was such a striking way of teaching me about programming in the large when I first heard someone describe this, that I have decided that I will steal it myself and teach other people in the way that I was taught, because it was such a good idea. What's that?
Tim's going to come after you with plagiarism.
Tim's going to come after me with plagiarism. It's okay, because I've acknowledged. I can't remember the name of the guy. He actually was a lecturer from New Zealand. So that's not a very good acknowledgement. He was a lecturer from New Zealand, and he was speaking at an education conference I was at. And he was saying, I've got this idea about a way of explaining this concept to students. And he started talking about it. And as he was explaining it, I was thinking, that's stupid. That's stupid. That's stupid. And then suddenly I thought, oh no. Oh, that's really clever. Oh, wow. And that night, because I wasn't there for education, I was there because I was showing people how to model high-dimensional geometric shapes and assemble them to do elaborate mathematical things. And I just spent that night thinking, wow, that was really cool. That's a really good way of explaining that idea. And then I thought about it more and thought, I never really understood that idea properly before. Wow. And like, I'm a PhD student. Computing's my thing, and wow, that was really compelling. So it really stuck with me, and I wish I could remember the poor guy's name. Let's call him Bob. So, footnote to this lecture, 1, thanks, Bob. Oh. Thanks, Bob. All right, so here's the idea. I haven't remembered exactly how he did it, and I've got a terrible memory, but this is how I remember it. Oh, no, don't tell me. I left it in my office. Oh, I left it in my office. No, I'm not going to go and get it. I'm going to... What's that? No, the screen's not, it doesn't need to be on. I wanted to, I'll do something else instead. I wanted to tell you guys about this thing that I'm going to call a miracle. So today's lecture is, we're going to describe this miracle, and it's going to be a bizarre miracle. Because A, we're not used to seeing miracles in lectures. Normally lectures are more pedestrian than that. And B, when you first see it, it might not actually seem like a miracle. And you might think, I don't see the miraculousness of this. But it is a miracle, and has anyone wondered why? Do you all know about the Pope coming out? Why do you think he's interested in coming out? And he's very close to here. He's going to the racetrack. Why do you think the Pope is coming so close to this uni? Because Yema wants it here. Could be, or it could be because he's heard about the miracle. Shh, shh, shh. The miracle is, in fact, here. I'll show it to you. Can everyone see this? This, thank you. This was given to me about 10 years ago. It's very old. It was given to me by my sister-in-law from Tasmania. And what she did was she went to a shop and bought this. And she didn't know the man in that shop. She didn't know anyone in that shop, in fact. As far as I know, it was the first time she'd been in that shop. And she bought this, and she took it home. She did some stuff to it, and then she put it in an envelope and posted it to me. Now, she lives in Tasmania. A couple of days later, I got an envelope, and it contained this. Now, I hadn't seen my sister-in-law for about a year, and I hadn't really talked to her that much. And there this was. Now, you can probably see from looking at it, but I'll describe. It's like maybe 10 centimetres across, would you say? What's that? 80 millimetres? Oh, yeah, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. It's quite light. I'm touching it by the sides, but if I hold it up this way, you'll notice it's actually very, very thin. Can you see that? It's amazingly shiny on one side. It's very attractive. On the other side, it's just gold, but not as attractive. It's got a circle in the middle, a hole, that I can actually just about fit my finger through. I'd say it's pretty close to a perfect circle. It's very circular. Looking at it, I can see lines radiating out from it. It's quite amazing. There's a transparent region in the centre. There's a region of silver just around that transparent region, then a blank region, and then this sort of psychedelic-y sort of rainbow colour thing. That goes almost all the way to the edge. Then there's another sort of very thin line around the outside, and then it's transparent again. I'd guess that this is actually made out of plastic, and there's some sort of film inside, some sort of thing. It hardly weighs anything. Doesn't have any smell at all, or taste. Doesn't make any sound. Now, the amazing thing is this. I mean, you guys probably know. Does anyone ever seen one of these before? Let me show you the amazing thing. Can you see? You might not actually. You might not be able to see. I'll just try and put it around here so you can see. My computer has on it a slot at the front that's about 10 centimetres across. And it's very thin, but it's slightly wider than this. And if I put this here, like this, that it's gone now. Let me see if I can. If it all works, I mean it's been years since I've done this, but if it all works, there we are. You can do this. Listen. I'll just leave that playing softly. That's the Andrews Sisters. Now, you probably can imagine how I felt when I first tried sticking this disc in the slot we had at home, and I heard beautiful music coming out. Because the ladies that sing this song, the Andrews Sisters, they were alive a long time ago. They never met my sister. They never met the man in my shop, the shop that my sister went to. They never met me. I never met any of those people except my sister-in-law. The person that made this computer was probably in China. Is unlikely to have met the Andrews Sisters or the man in the shop that sold the disc. The people that made the disc is TDK. That's a Japanese conglomerate, I assume. Yeah, is that right? The people in TDK, I would expect, are not the same people that are in China that made this. None of these people probably have ever met each other. It's cool, isn't it? Let me just stop it for a sec. Do you see? No. Do you see what's happened? That a group of people that have never met each other, that don't know each other, that have never talked to each other, have somehow managed to, in a factory in Japan, make a plastic disc that is sold in a shop in Tasmania, that is sent to a boy in Sydney who has bought a box which was made in China. Yet this disc fits exactly in this box, and beautiful music comes out. How could that happen? It is a complete miracle. I can't even negotiate with my wife, who's going to buy the shopping. We get to the end of the week and where are the sausages? I thought you were going to buy them. No, I thought you were going to buy them. We can't between us work out who's going to buy sausages. Yet these people, without even communicating, were able to make a disc so precise, so microscopically engineered, with somehow using lasers encoded on it in some weird and incredibly intense way. If there was the slightest error or fraction or difference between the understanding of the person that made this and the understanding of the person that manufactured the disc, or the understanding of the person that put the data onto the disc, if these guys had even the slightest misunderstanding, there is no hope that would have worked. If we went back to Renaissance Europe and you went to the King of Spain and you said, I have a great idea, my lord. Someone in another country will make a disc, and by a way of putting impressions and dots and raised mounds on that disc, they will somehow encode beautiful music. And I will get a man in another country to get a machine that will play this disc, and we will hear that music. And the only constraint I've got is these people can never meet each other. Everyone would think you're a lunatic. It's impossible to believe they could even do it if it was the same person. But how can completely different people in completely different countries make something that is so sensitive to error that the slightest misunderstanding or difference will mean the thing won't work? When you do a group project, if you have a misunderstanding about who's going to write chapter 3 of the report, you might well end up, when the report's being handed in, with 2 chapter 3s or no chapter 3s or chapter 3 not containing something that it was going to... And that's just a minor understanding between you guys, and you've probably had meetings every week discussing it. Yet a minor understanding about a trivial thing like that can stop something simple from working. Something so amazingly complex. If you think about the complexity in this CD, think about the precision and the amount of information encoded in it, and the amount of thought that's gone into the way the information is encoded, and the physics of actually doing the encoding, and then the physics of reading it back. If you were to think about all of this, it's very elaborate and precise. The chance of it working is close to nil. The chance of it working when different people work on it has got to be nil. How could it ever happen? I've worked with people before, we're hopeless. We misunderstand each other completely. It's very hard to get anything to work. How could something as complex as this actually work? What is it that makes it work? What do you think it is that makes it work?
Trial and error, they had plans.
But it wasn't exactly trial and error. I mean, it's not as though I stuck it in and it didn't work and I rang the guy in China and said, oh, it worked for the first half, then it stopped. I mean, I just stuck it in and it just worked. And what's more, this miracle we take so much for granted that I bet you guys are prepared to spend $30 on these discs and you don't say, can I get this back if it doesn't work? I bet you just buy it and you just assume it will work. And I bet you could go to Thailand and you would just go to a market and from someone you couldn't even communicate with me, you'd be happy to buy one of these discs and you would just somehow think, oh yeah, that's going to work when I go back to Australia and plug it in. Yeah, that's just going to work from this guy I don't know anything about in Thailand. We just take it so much for granted. This is like a miracle. It's a hidden miracle because it's an everyday miracle because it happens all the time. And without it, we could not have modern technological civilization. It is the miracle that distinguishes us from the Renaissance. It is what has enabled the world to do the things the world can do now. And yet it is such an everyday miracle, we don't even notice this miracle happening. What is this miracle? People keep calling it out. What is the miracle? Standards. The idea is this. The idea is you want to make a disc. Yes. You want to make a box to play a disc. You guys are not allowed to talk to each other. And in fact, all of you guys want to make a disc. And all of you guys want to make boxes to play discs. And you're all different large Japanese conglomerates. And you're all just large Japanese conglomerates. You're not allowed to talk to each other and you're not allowed to talk to these guys. Here's how you're allowed to communicate. There is one and only one way you can communicate. And that is by a document that gets produced, which is called a standard. And what the standard says is, if you want to make a disc, it shall be exactly 10.2917 millimeters wide. It shall be of a thickness between this and that. It will have a reflectivity to laser in a particular spectrum of the frequency of this amount of decibels. The disc shall be stable when rotated at this velocity and shall be physically stable under these ranges of temperatures. The hole in the center shall be exactly this size, and the angular momentum of the disc shall not produce forces beyond blah, 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 given blah, 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 blah. And you will go and manufacture a disc. And the material that it's made of, the foil inside, has to have certain physical properties. And the transparent plastic on top has to have certain transparencies and opacities at various frequencies. In this spec, set out here, is every little relevant piece of information. And then you go and look at that spec and you make a disc. And this spec is not like just a page long. This is like a book. It actually is a book. It's called the... Oh, actually, it's not the Red Book. I was going to say it's the Red Book. There's one standard about the physical structure of the disc. There's another standard about how you're going to encode all the data onto the disc. And that's called the Red Book or the Orange Book or something like that. These are great big fat books. So when you make the disc, you go to this standard and you read this book and you make a disc exactly that complies with this standard. And when you make your box to play it, you make a player that assumes it's getting a disc which is made exactly in accordance with this standard. So you can assume the disc is a certain size, you can assume the hole is a certain diameter, you can assume there's a certain mass or a certain limits on the mass, you can assume it can be sped at a certain rate, you can assume a laser of a certain frequency pointing at a certain angle can do things, because it's all set out in the spec. The spec is like a contract. Whenever you make a disc, you say, I vow this disc complies with the standard. And whenever you make a player, you say, I vow that if you give me a disc that complies with this standard, it will play on my player. You each make this vow. It's your contract, and the standard mediates the contract. Then there's another standard that talks about how the data is encoded. So you make a burning program that burns data onto CDs. Your burning program exactly complies with the Red Book, which is, it's probably called something like ISO 9660. Probably. I don't know if that's a red book. Is that literally the red book?
Pretty sure.
Yeah. That's certainly a standard for putting data on a disk. Let's say that's the red book standard. So you write a program that exactly complies with this standard. It uses the compression that this standard uses. It uses the bit ordering and the big endian and the little endian. It uses the bit size and the depth of the bits, and it just does everything that this physically requires you to do. Your burner encodes data using this. And you make a player, iTunes or something. And you make it so that given any data that complies with this standard, you can extract the sound from it. Now you guys don't need to talk to each other. And now we can have 50 people writing burners and 50 people writing different players, and they will all magically interoperate with each other as long as they comply with the standards. Now, what are the two risks? What are the two things that can go wrong? Yeah?
The standard may need to be changed.
The standard might not be good enough. Maybe the standard's ambiguous. What's the problem if the standard's ambiguous? Yeah, you might interpret it one way, you might interpret it another way. It might never say that the disk has to be stable at a certain temperature, and you might make it out of chocolate. And you happen to be in Iceland, and it all works. And you're in Abu Sabadabada, and you're playing it, and it just melts everywhere. Because the spec was open on an issue. It didn't pin it down enough. Or maybe the spec is poorly written, and at one point it implies this has to be 1 centimetre across, and another point it implies it has to be 1.05. You know, that would be a fairly obvious mistake, but suppose that was in it. Then people would have a choice about how to implement it. If that ambiguity was in the spec, whose problem does that become, literally in this case? Whose problem is it? If it's not clear whether it's 1 or 1.05, whose problem is it? Not everyone, not the people who make the standards, not their problem anymore. People who make the disk, no, it's not their problem. They can make it that or that. They've got more choices. They like that. The person that writes the player, it's their problem. Their player now has to be able to deal with disks that are this size or disks that are this size. So the more sloppy the spec, the harder the job is for the player, and the easier it is for the manufacturer. The more tightly prescribed the spec is, the easier it is for the person writing the player, and the harder it is for the person manufacturing the disk, because more and more constraints are put on them. Yeah?
Someone with massive market share doesn't adhere to the spec properly.
Okay, so problem number one is what if the spec itself isn't right? Problem number two is what if people don't adhere to the spec? Now we've got a yucky problem. What if people make disks that don't comply with this spec? What's the problem? You stick them in one machine, they work because the person that made that machine complied with the spec, and for out-of-spec behaviour, they happen to deal with this disk correctly. Yeah? You stick it in another machine and it doesn't work because that person wasn't obligated to support that. Like suppose, for example, the spec mandates the disks have to be exactly 3.5 millimetres thick. Suppose that's what the spec says. And someone makes some disks that are 4 mil thick. Just turn. Then if your player had a bit of flexibility and didn't really mind about the thickness of the disk, everything would be okay. But if your player was a crappy little box that you could never open up or take the screws off, and the disk gets absorbed inside it, never to be seen again, and it gets jammed in there, you are so stuffed. So it becomes a nightmarish problem. So who would ever want to break a spec? What would be the advantage of not complying with the standard? Surely that's a bad thing to do. What's that? Vendor lock-in. Okay, let's just hypothetically suppose there's a company called Micro Oft. And let's suppose there's a standard for how to write web pages called, I don't know, let's make it up, HTML. And that's a standard. And if you write a web page that complies with the HTML standard, then any browser made by anyone that can read the HTML standard can view your web page. So we're not locked into a particular buyer or seller of anything here. Anyone can write a web page, anyone can view a web page. Now what happened if someone making a viewer like, for example, what does that stand for? Not for example. IE means that is. Someone makes a browser that is able to display extra things that aren't in the standard. So that you could have a tag called, I don't know, some illegal piece of HTML. Let's suppose, I think Blink sadly is in the standard. Isn't it? Oh, how happy that makes me. Suppose you write a Blink tag because someone thinks how cool it would be if a web page, as well as having lots of different colours and lots of different fonts and lots of different text sizes all jumbled together, if some of those could be flashing at you. How cool that would be. And the people that manufacture this web browser, what if they decided, actually our web browser can display pages which include non-standard things? Now, you might think that's not really an attack on the standard, but it is. Especially if you publish and tell people, anyone that wants to put this in, we're going to display your page and it's going to be 20% more fantastic because it's going to be blinking now. Now, if most people in the world happen to use this browser, you're pretty safe to put this Blink tag in your HTML page because most people in the world can view it and it'll behave as you expect for most people in the world. But what about poor old people using something like Firefox or Mosaic or something like that, some other browser that does comply with the standard? What happens then?
It doesn't blink.
They can't view it. They can't see it. Although the thing complies with the, although they can display everything that complies with the standard, if someone starts encouraging people to use things beyond the standard, extra to the standard, then people are sort of tied in and they have to use their particular browser because the other ones can't do it. And it creates this sort of lock-in thing. And you start getting these repulsive web pages that say, best viewed using. Yeah, best viewed using Internet Explorer. What does that mean? It means I've written a hopeless web page. It doesn't comply with the standard. If you want to view it, you have to use the same security hole-ridden piece of crap that I'm using. And that sort of forces people to use it. So this is sort of an attack. Because who likes standards? All the little people in Japan, all the little conglomerates in Japan like standards because they can all go out and make browsers and players. And who likes standards? All the people in China that make discs, they love standards. They can make a disk and anyone in the world can use it. And who likes standard? All the people in some other country that make web rippers, audio rippers software. They love it because they can just write ripping software and it'll just work and anyone can use it. And who likes it? All the people that play players like it because anyone can write a player and anyone else can use it to play anything. All these little people like it. But who doesn't like it? Well, you're the only person in the room that doesn't like it. Because you're bad, man. Because you want everyone to use your stuff. And you don't like the fact that if someone in China makes a better one cheaper, that they could use that instead. You'd like people to be locked into using your stuff. The ideas of standards is that everything can interoperate with everything else. We don't want that. We want everyone using your stuff. So selfishly, you start putting things in your products so that people just want to use your stuff. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so that's the second way that standards can go down. The third way is standards can be wrong because they're not precise enough. Standards can be wrong because they contain inconsistencies. Those both cause problems, each for the different parties. Standards can be deliberately broken by people, and that's a real pain because once the standard starts getting broken, no one can rely on the standard being there, and it sort of undermines the whole value of the standard. The value of the standard is you can go to Thailand and buy a disk with confidence, and you don't have to rack your brains and sweat and hope that it's going to work when you get home and stick it in the CD player that your mum's going to give you for Christmas. You don't need to bring the CD player into the shop and try it. You just know it will work. That's wonderful confidence to have. Attacks on standards attack that confidence. It makes you think, oh, maybe I better get a Microsoft CD because there's a good chance no other CDs are going to work. I better be safe. Okay, so that's a sad thing when people start thinking that. It reduces choice. All right, so there are three of the ways standards can break. There's another way standards can break, but we'll talk about that another day. So does everyone understand why this is a miracle? It is so commonplace and everyday that we'll just take it for granted. But there are standards all around the place that let us do amazing things. For example, the clock. All right. Clocks are standardised to Greenwich Mean, well, they're not anymore, but suppose they were standardised to Greenwich Mean Time. So everyone has a clock that's standardised with everyone else's clock, and I can say to you, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock. I don't have to say, oh, and what sort of time do you keep on your... I've got a Microsoft watch. Okay. Keep sidereal time or something. Anyone can talk to anyone. It doesn't matter who makes the watch. We can communicate. And I can learn how to read a clock, and that means I can read any clock made in the world. Because there's only really one way of making an analog clock, and that's we divide it into 12 and we do all that sort of stuff. It's very convenient once we've got a standard, because once you've learned something once, you can use it everywhere. I find that whenever I travel to another country and I get in the car, I can just drive the car, even though it's in another country. If I want to use my mum and dad's car, and they let me, then I can drive their car, even though it's a different brand of car to my car. I don't have to learn how to drive again or anything, because just about every car in the world is the same. I know they're always trying to tell us the cars are so different, but they're the same. There's like 2 seats in the front, there's like a pedal for going fast, and a pedal on the other side of it for going slower, and there's a wheel, and you turn it this way, the car goes that way, and you turn it this way. It's sort of all the same, and if you want to put on the blinkers, it's going to have blinkers. It'll either be something here, or it'll be something here. If you want to put on a brake, it'll be something here, or it'll be something here. There's just this, they're all the same. It's so boring when you get in a car, but it's fantastic because it means you can just jump in a car, hotwire it, and drive off, even if you've never seen that car before, because we all understand, there's not an actual legal standard for cars. It's just the car manufacturers know most people expect a car to be like this, so it makes sense so there's a sort of de facto standard about cars. There probably are standards. There are standards, they're just not codified in a book of some colour. What else? What's this? It's a cable. I can use this to connect just about any computer in this room to this desk here. And not just to this desk, I could use it if I wanted to unplug to connect to this monitor. And I could connect just about any computer to just about any monitor. Now at home I've got an old Mac, a really old Mac that I keep for when I teach algorithms. It's so old and slow, it's a complete joke. And I like it still working. So I can demonstrate to students that the important thing isn't the hardware you run, it's your brain. So we write a clever program on my old bomby Mac that runs at 1 mile an hour. And then we write a stupid program on some super duper hooper Pentium 9 that some students bought and they're so proud of. And we just say, go, and the Mac goes, done. And the super fast one here just goes, but it sits silent. Because it doesn't matter how fast the super fast one is, it's got a stupid program on it, it's never going to finish before the universe stops. And it doesn't matter how slow this one is, it's going to finish in some period of time, it's going to be okay. So I like keeping this old Mac, and the annoying thing is I have to keep all the cables and the screen, and if I lose any of these components, it won't work, because it has different connectors and different standards, and there's a different way of talking to the screen. So I'm dead if I lose any of those components. You guys probably aren't used to that sort of world, because in your world, just about every screen and just about every monitor has the same connector. These days we have 2 sorts of connectors, don't we? Because we're slowly bringing in a new standard, DVI. Okay, so we've got VGA and DVI, or SVGA. But essentially we've just got 2 standards and we can all plug anything into anything. What about this? This is a device. To run, it needs electricity. Does it have an electricity plant inside it? No. In fact, it just assumes, are you sure? Has a little man inside, homunculus. The people that made this assumed they were going to be getting 240 volts at 50 hertz or 60, well, let's see what they assumed. It's even written on it somewhere what they assumed. They assumed they're getting somewhere between 220 and 240 volts, that it's going to be AC. They assume nothing about the frequency of it, it seems. And they assume they've got at least 5 amps and never ever turn this sideways. Oh, whoops. So this will work given 240 volts. Lo and behold, this lecture theatre has run, this whole university and every house in Australia has running through it everywhere, just waiting for you to use it, 240 volts of the right frequency, of the right cleanness, the right sort of sine wave to power this without it working. And how do I get that power? All these guys had to do was have a plug, which was designed in a particular way with 3 little fins. And in every room, there's the, can you see them down here? They're these sockets. All the same, and any plug will fit in any socket. That's not strictly true, 15 amp plugs won't fit in and so on. But let's suppose, more or less the same. So I don't have to think about power when I'm manufacturing this. I just have to make a standards compliant plug And I'll assume in the house there's a standards compliant socket. And things will just work. And I can buy any device from any store, not thinking about electricity, and it will just work when I go to any house in Australia. And when I went to Hong Kong, they have a different standard. They have those like the British sort of square plugs that look quite impressive, actually. It looks more Frankenstein-y. Our plugs look very flimsy and weak. I wish we had the big plugs, but anyway. And so I had to change a different standard. So none of my gear actually worked in Hong Kong. So I got a standards adapter, the converter, because they use the same form of electricity, just a different plug. I got a little plug adapter, and then I could plug any of my devices to anything in Hong Kong. How much nicer it would be if everywhere in the world just used the same standard, then any device could plug in anywhere. But at least we've got a finite number of known and advanced standards, and going to Hong Kong, you can look up the standard. Does that make sense? What other standards are around here? Can anyone see standards that we're just relying on?
Building standard to hold up the roof.
Building standards to hold up the roof? Yeah, I guess we have a reasonable amount of confidence that this building is safe, so we don't think about it because we assume they've complied with all the standards.
Even so, we're not civil engineers, so we wouldn't know.
Even so, we're not civil engineers, so we've probably got a false sense of confidence. That's right, I don't know. What else? Well, what other standards are there? Yeah. Sound. The speakers here? Okay, the people that made the amplifier assume probably they'd be driving an 8 ohm load. And it would take a certain amount of watts and stuff, and certain frequencies could be reproduced and certain wouldn't. And is that what you mean, sort of thing? Yeah, and these are designed to present an 8 ohm impedance and make an audible sound with that amount of power. And you can buy any speaker and any amplifier and plug them together and they'll sort of work. Yeah? What about something like the bricks in the wall? The bricks in the wall are made to standards. When the architect or the quantity surveyor designed this building, he probably said, oh, we'll need 5,000 10,000 bricks. And he probably didn't have to say more than that, except maybe visually he said, oh, I want them to be a certain grade and a certain standard. Because all bricks in Australia essentially are standard dimensions and fit together standardly. And the bricklayers have gear and tools that work with these standard sizes, and they just turn up to a job and everything's just a unit and it all fits together. And they're really precisely made. Is that what you meant? Yeah, that was a good one. Something else?
Yeah, I was just thinking the format of the lecture itself. Like, you have a lecture.
The format of university, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy if every day uni was different? It'd be very hard. Remember in the first week that you had to get used to a whole lot of new stuff, and we wasted a whole lot of times and spun our wheels a bit because some of you went up to biomed, in theory, and you know, all that stuff sort of happened. But now you know how uni runs, you're just going to take it for granted, and every year from now on it's going to be easier. It'll never be as hard as first semester was, because you'll just turn up and you'll just sit in the room and you'll assume that you go to lectures, you have tutes, you have labs, you sit down, I talk for an integral number of hours, you write a certain, you know, yeah, there's this sort of standard way of doing it, and now you can relax and concentrate on what I'm saying rather than being stressed about what's going to happen next and not knowing. Yeah. Language, yeah. You can understand what I'm saying. Wouldn't it be crazy if we'd all developed different languages? And I had to somehow communicate with each of you differently. I mean, we sort of do have to communicate with each of you differently because we all learn slightly differently. So that's always a challenge teaching a large class, because in any given instant, 50 people are concentrating on 50 different things that I've said. But yeah, we all have the same language. It's a perfect standard. And let's think, in Hong Kong, for example, they give all their lectures in English. That's the standard. Even though most people there speak Chinese and English, they give their lectures in English, except at one uni, the Chinese uni, I think. So yeah, that's perfect. A perfect way of standardization. It's a mean standard because some people, you don't have to just know a little bit to know how to speak English. You know, there's like a small number of words that are really common, and there's an absurdly large number of words that are really rare. And if I wanted to be a dick and not communicate, I could just use a whole lot of jargon, couldn't I? And sort of show off and impress you, and we wouldn't be communicating. And that's still inside the standard of English, so I'd be getting away with it. So the standard's probably a bit too generous there. Yeah. Yes? Keyboards, yeah. You sit down at a keyboard, you more or less know. Look, I don't know about Chinese keyboards. I don't know how they work. Are they sort of the same? Yes. Yeah, we sort of know. So once you've learned how to type, you've sort of learned how to type, and you can probably, it doesn't really matter which computer you go to, you can probably use it. I know there's, you know, there are Dvorak keyboards. Someone told me, I don't know if this is true, that the QWERTY keyboards that we all used were designed because the old mechanical typewriters would jam up really easily if you typed too quickly. You're nodding, this is the case. So they actually made the worst layout of keys they could to force people to type more slowly. Is it? It wasn't that.
The letters people type quickly, like, you know, that might come after each other, are far apart, so because when you have two hammers that go up, they jam.
So letters that are likely to be next to each other in the text are far apart on the keyboard. Okay, so we wouldn't get two hammers coming up next to each other. I remember that jamming effect. And maybe that's a bad standard now. Maybe if we reconsidered the whole thing, we'd actually be able to come up with keyboards that are faster. And maybe that's what Dvorak keyboards are supposed to do. Does anyone know? Yeah. But it's very hard to change a standard. Once you've got 1 million people making 1 million keyboards in 1 million countries and learning it in 1 million schools and 1 million offices, changing a new thing, Hey, does anyone know the story? Do you all remember? Oh, this is a fun story. Does anyone remember video cassettes? It's what video shops used to rent. And Betamax, that's what I'm going to say. Who's heard of Betamax? Oh, it's so cool. My grandpa had a Betamax player. There were two sort of standard ways of recording video onto tapes that could be used in domestic environments. One was called Betamax and one was called VHS. Very hopeless standard. Now Betamax came along first and was invented, I think, by Sony, is that right? But Sony invented Betamax, and anyone that made a Betamax cassette could play it in any player that complied with the Betamax standard. And Sony thought, how nice if I was the only one that was able to make players, because I reckon there's going to be a lot of video players made. I'd like to be the only one that makes them. I don't want you guys to be making video players. I'd like to sell them all. I'm happy for everyone to make tapes, but I'd like everyone just to use my player. So Sony said the specification for Betamax, they didn't call it a standard, they called it intellectual property, which means it's my idea and I don't want to share it with anyone. And if you wanted to make a player that complied with that standard, you had to pay them a license fee. I don't even know if they even let people do it or the license fee was stupid. But the point was, it was just ludicrous. Essentially, only Sony could make players. But it was such a huge market, and everyone could see that pretty soon every home would have 3 or 4 video cassettes of their own, maybe even, to watch over and over again, like Grease and things like that. So everyone wanted to get a player. So all the manufacturing companies wanted to make them, and Sony said, well, you can't. So what did they do? They made their own standard. They said, all right, well, we'll make our own standard, VHS. And this will be what we call an open standard. And anyone can make a VHS tape, and anyone can make a VHS player, and here's what the standard is. Now, Betamax was heaps better. I can't remember why.
I've had higher quality, but it didn't last as long.
The tape didn't go as long, but the picture was higher quality or something. It was like better than DVD. No. It's like, in the scale of things, I guess these days we'd consider them all a joke. But in those days, VHS was pretty... Betamax was just a bit better for some reason, quality or maybe... Okay. But although technically the Betamax standard was better, well, there were 2 standards around, and for a couple of years video rental stores used to have half the store for videotapes in Betamax format and half the store was for videotapes in VHS format. But after a couple of years there was only one format that you could find in a video store. Which one do you think it was? Betamax. Close. It was VHS. Yeah. How come?
Cheaper.
No, it wasn't cheaper. Oh, well, yeah, I guess it was. What's that?
No license fee, so everyone can make the stuff and undercut Sony's price.
Yeah, like most people had players that were VHS players because most people just bought VHS players because you could get the Sony one or you could get one of a billion other ones. Sony can't compete with that. So, you know, there could be cut price people making really cheap ones and high grade people making really high quality ones and just a huge range of consumer choice. One company, Sony, couldn't match that. And then because there was vigorous competition in this world, prices were lower. So most people ended up with VHS players. Very few people, except enthusiasts, ever bought a Betamax player, which meant there was little demand for Betamax. And it was a vicious cycle. And in the early days, that's sort of what IBM tried to do when they brought out the PC. The early PC came out and other people wanted to copy the PC because it was really popular. Let me remember, I'm probably going to get this story terribly wrong. I vaguely remember, I think the bottleneck might have been Intel. I think Intel and IBM both tried to hold on to it. And people started copying the Intel chip, but they couldn't copy it exactly because that was breaking intellectual property. Yeah, AMD and other people. There are probably only AMD left, is that right? Other people, you can get other people make copies of Intel stuff. So they used to do copies of it that complied with the same spec but were different inside. They were like register level the same, but inside all the wiring was different. And IBM tried really hard to hold on to being the people that made PCs, but these days, who's got a PC actually made by IBM? Like some of us, I've got one at home, but hardly any. But if anyone talks about them, we'll still talk about them as IBM PCs. Does anyone here? It's the IBM Standard. So if you've got a PC, we'd call that an IBM PC. Not because it's made by IBM, it's made by ASUS, but because it's complying with the standard that IBM invented when they invented the personal computer. Now this standard was so cool because it meant that you could now make a printer to this standard of a parallel port and various other things, and anyone's IBM PC could use your printer. Instead of everyone having different printers and different screens for hundreds of different sorts of computers, now you could just make one sort of printer, and everyone with an IBM machine could use your printer. So massively all the printer companies like that ideas, and all the screen manufacturing companies like that idea, and all the software manufacturing companies. So then the demand for IBM PCs got bigger and bigger, and then other people wanted to make them too. And I think IBM tried to fight them off. Does anyone know the details of that story? They did try and fight them off?
They did, and then Microsoft sold MS-DOS to Compaq, and Compaq were the first to release IBM phones.
I see. Aha. So it was okay. Yeah, well, Microsoft, I vaguely remember, made the operating system for IBM, and they called it no, they didn't call it MS-DOS. They called it PC-DOS for the IBM PC. And then they released another copy of it called MS-DOS to everyone else, Microsoft DOS. Can't remember all the details. But anyway, thank heavens it did happen. That standard was broken. It wasn't held as intellectual property. Everyone made machines to that standard. And that's what made it such a success. Because now any machine in the world you buy sort of complies with that standard. Any hard drive you buy can probably plug into any laptop you buy, I mean, if there's room. And any bit can apply to any other bit, and any memory chip can plug in, you know, because we're all complying with the same standards, and because we've all got the same sort of machine, even though they're made by hundreds of different companies, is really convenient. Yes?
There's actually a story behind MS-DOS.
Yes?
They actually bought it for a ridiculously low price off some company in Texas.
Oh yeah, like I heard that too, that Bill Gates didn't write MS-DOS, he bought it from someone else,
And then they sold it.
and then sold it. Excellent. Love that, love that, gotta love that. Okay, a guy called Tim. How we all remember him. Poor Tim, he's probably sitting at home. It's like the guy that left the Beatles just before they became famous. So I think, oh. All right, is everyone cool? You understand standards? It all makes sense. All right, let's take a little break. And then after the break, I'm going to show you some C and we'll talk about task 2.